The lobby fell silent as her shoes scraped helplessly across the polished floor. Two security guards dragged her forward, their grips tight, their faces cold with certainty. Phones were already raised. Whispers spread like sparks. Who is she? What did she do? She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Instead, she lifted her eyes to the ceiling as if listening for something no one else could hear. Then the PA system crackled. Static. A pause. And a voice, calm, controlled, unmistakably authoritative. "Attention all personnel," it said. "Do not remove Emily Carter from this facility." Her full name echoed through the hospital like a gunshot. The guards froze. The administrator went pale. Somewhere deep inside the building, phones began ringing secure lines that almost never rang. No one in that lobby knew who she really was, but the Pentagon did. And in that moment, everyone realized the biggest mistake had already been made. Before the story begins, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you enjoy powerful, true-feeling stories like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. Emily Carter stood just inside the sliding glass doors of the emergency department, letting the noise wash over her like surf against stone. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. Gurneys rattled past. The air smelled of antiseptic, overheated coffee and something metallic that never fully left places where blood was routine. Above it all, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, too bright, too constant, designed to erase shadows and time. She adjusted the strap of the canvas bag on her shoulder. It was old, frayed at the edges, the kind of bag people stopped noticing once they decided it wasn't important. That suited her. Emily wore jeans, flat shoes, and a grey zip-up hoodie. No badge, no uniform, nothing that announced purpose. To anyone watching, she looked like another exhausted visitor, maybe a sister, maybe a girlfriend, maybe someone who'd slept in her car and come in hoping for answers. She paused at the threshold, eyes moving, not wondering but measuring. She clocked the security desk on her left, noted the blind spot near the vending machines, the way the trauma bay doors opened inward instead of sliding. She noticed which cameras were real and which were decoys. She noticed the nurse station's line of sight to the waiting area and how easily it could be blocked by a single gurney turned the wrong way. Old habits, hard to turn off. Emily exhaled slowly and stepped inside. The triage nurse barely looked up. Name Emily Carter. A keyboard clicked. Date of birth. She gave it. The nurse glanced at the screen, frowned for half a second, then smoothed her expression. Reason for visit. Emily hesitated, not long enough to look suspicious, but long enough to be honest with herself. "I'm here to see a patient," she said. "A critical one." The nurse's fingers stopped. Finally, she looked up properly. "Family, no. Friend, no." The nurse leaned back in her chair. Her badge read Karen Willis, RN. She'd been on her feet for 12 hours already, her patience worn thin by drunk fights, screaming toddlers, and one too many people who thought rules were suggestions. "Then you'll need to wait," Karen said, already turning back to her screen. "We'll call you if and when that's appropriate." Emily didn't move. "I don't think waiting is a good idea," she said calmly. Karen looked up again, irritation flaring. "Excuse me, there's a window," Emily replied. "If we miss it, people die." The word die hung between them. A man in the waiting area snorted softly. Another woman rolled her eyes. Karen's mouth tightened. "Listen," Karen said, lowering her voice in the way that meant she was done being polite. "Everyone here thinks their situation is urgent. That doesn't give you special access." Emily nodded once. "I understand." But she still didn't step away. That was the moment the charge nurse noticed them. "Problem?" the charge nurse asked, approaching. She was taller, broader, her presence heavy with authority earned through chaos. Her name badge read, Linda Rodriguez, RN Charge. Karen gestured sharply. She won't move on. Claims she needs access to a patient she's not related to. Linda's gaze slid to Emily, sharp and assessing. "Ma'am," Emily met her eyes without flinching. "There's a patient inbound," she said. "Male, mid-40s, multiple system trauma. He's going to crash within minutes of arrival unless specific protocols are followed." Linda blinked. "We have trauma protocols. Not these ones." Silence. Linda studied Emily's face, no hysteria, no pleading, just certainty. That unsettled her more than shouting ever would. And how exactly would you know that, Linda asked, Emily opened her mouth and stopped. A flicker crossed her expression. Calculation. Restraint. "I can't explain it here," she said instead. "But I need to speak with whoever is running trauma intake tonight. Now." Linda's jaw set. She had seen confidence before. She had also seen liars who wore it like armor. "You don't get to walk in off the street and start giving orders," Linda said. "This is a hospital." Emily nodded again. "I know. That was the problem." Linda gestured toward the waiting area. "Have a seat. Security will help you if you need directions." Emily finally shifted her weight. For a second it looked like she might comply. Instead, she reached into her hoodie pocket. Karen stiffened instantly. "Hey, Emily," pulled out a phone. "Old model. No case." She glanced at the screen, then locked it without answering. Linda saw the movement, the restraint, the way Emily's hand hovered near her side afterward, not nervous, not aggressive. "Ready. Security," Linda called out, raising her voice just enough. 2 guards near the desk turned immediately. "Can you escort this woman to the waiting area?" Linda said. "She's interfering with triage." Emily lowered her phone slowly. "I don't want this to become a scene." Karen laughed under her breath. "Then stop making one." One of the guards stepped closer. He was young, broad-shouldered, his badge reading D. Haskins. He gave Emily the practiced smile of someone used to people backing down. "Ma'am," he said, "let's go." Emily looked past him down the hallway that led to the trauma bays. For just a fraction of a second, something tightened in her eyes, urgency sharpened by something deeper. Guilt, maybe. Or responsibility. "Please," she said quietly, "you're about to receive someone who matters. Not because of rank, not because of power. Because people will die if this goes wrong." Linda crossed her arms. "Enough." Haskins reached for Emily's elbow. The moment his hand touched her sleeve, Emily reacted not with force, but with precision. She shifted her stance just enough to relieve pressure, just enough to prevent control. Training surfaced instinctively, then vanished as she forced herself still. "Don't," she said softly. The word wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. Haskins frowned. "Ma'am," Linda's voice snapped. "Escort her out if she won't comply." The second guard moved to Emily's other side. Around them, heads turned. Whispers started again. Someone pulled out a phone and began recording openly. Emily closed her eyes for one heartbeat. Too early, she thought. This isn't how it's supposed to happen. She let her arms go slack as they guided her forward. Not resisting, not helping. As they moved her toward the exit, the automatic doors hissing softly in anticipation, Emily's phone vibrated once in her pocket. A single vibration. Sharp. Deliberate. She felt it like an electric pulse. The guards didn't notice. The nurses didn't notice. But somewhere far from the noise and fluorescent glare, a clock had just started counting down. The automatic doors parted with a soft hiss, spilling cold night air into the emergency department like an unwanted breath. Emily felt it brush her skin as the security guards guided her forward, their hands firm but not yet rough. The parking lot beyond glowed under harsh sodium lights, asphalt dark and wet from a recent rinse by maintenance crews. Freedom, if it could be called that, was only a few feet away. "Ma'am, we don't want to make this harder than it needs to be," Haskins said, lowering his voice. "Just step outside, cool off, and you can figure out your next move." Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the trauma bay doors behind them, where red lights flickered briefly, an incoming alert. Her jaw tightened. Behind the security desk, Linda Rodriguez was already turning back to her clipboard, mentally checking the box marked "problem handled." Karen exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Every night," Karen muttered. "Every single night there's someone who thinks they know better." Linda didn't respond, but something nagged at her. Not doubt she trusted her instincts too much for that, but discomfort. The woman's calm had been wrong somehow. Too controlled, too deliberate. "Linda," a voice called out. "Doctor." Mark Reynolds approached from the hallway, still tugging on gloves as he walked. He was in his early 40s with tired eyes and the posture of someone who'd learned to live under constant pressure. "What's going on?" he asked. "Nothing," Karen said quickly. Visitor refusing to follow protocol. Reynolds glanced toward the doors just in time to see Emily hesitate. She turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. It wasn't panic he saw there. It was calculation. Reynolds frowned. "Hold on." The guards paused instinctively. Haskins looked back over his shoulder. Dr. Reynolds stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, you said something about an incoming trauma patient." Emily nodded once. "Yes. Do you work in medicine?" "Yes," Karen scoffed. "Oh, come on." Reynolds raised a hand without looking at her. His attention stayed on Emily. "What kind of medicine?" Emily hesitated again, longer this time. "Not the kind with business cards," she said. Reynolds absorbed that. He glanced back toward the hallway as another alert chimed overhead. "What's his injury?" Reynolds asked. "Blunt force trauma, chest and abdomen," Emily replied immediately. "Internal bleeding you won't see on the first scan. Airway compromise within minutes if you intubate the standard way." Reynolds' brows drew together. "That's a lot of detail for a guess." "It's not a guess." Linda stepped forward now, irritation flaring again. "Doctor, this is not the time. If you intubate the standard way," Emily continued, her voice low but steady, "you'll collapse a compromised structure. You need a surgical airway ready before he rolls in." Reynolds stared at her. "How do you know that?" he demanded. Emily's lips parted. Her phone vibrated again. Once, twice. This time the sound was faint but unmistakable. Haskins felt it through the fabric of her sleeve. He stiffened. "She's getting calls." "It's not a call," Emily said quietly. "It's a signal." Karen laughed sharply. "What is this, a spy movie now?" Emily looked at Karen, not with anger, not even annoyance. Just a brief assessing glance, the way someone looked at a variable that no longer mattered. "Please," Emily said, turning back to Reynolds. "I don't have clearance to explain everything here, but I promise you if you let me walk out that door, you're going to wish you hadn't." Reynolds hesitated. Linda didn't. "That's enough," Linda said firmly. "Security, remove her from the building." The second guard tightened his grip. Emily closed her eyes again, longer this time. When she opened them, something in her expression had shifted, not fear, not anger, but resolve. "Okay," she said. "Then do it." They moved again, faster now. Phones were definitely out. A murmur rippled through the lobby as people sensed escalation, the subtle electricity of something about to go wrong. As the doors slid open fully, Emily felt the vibration again. This time, she answered. She didn't raise the phone to her ear. She simply pressed a button through the fabric of her pocket. "Yes," she said quietly. Haskins' head snapped toward her. "Who are you talking to?" Emily didn't look at him. "I'm being removed from the facility," she said. That was not the agreed scenario. A pause. The night air pressed closer. Linda's voice cut through. "Ma'am, you are not permitted to take calls while understood," Emily replied, calmly speaking past her. "Proceed to contingency." Another pause. Longer. "Then I'm inside the east exit. 30 feet from the doors." She listened for a beat, then added, "I recommend you intervene. Now." She released the button. The guards dragged her fully into the vestibule, the doors beginning to close behind them. Inside the emergency department, alarms began chiming in earnest. A trauma alert, red lights flashing above the bay doors. "Incoming in 2 minutes," someone shouted. Reynolds watched the doors seal shut, unease settling deep in his gut. "Linda," he said quietly, "if she's bluffing, fine. But if she's not, she is," Linda snapped. "And even if she isn't, we don't let strangers dictate operations." Outside, Emily's shoes scraped against the concrete as the guards repositioned their grips. One of them shifted his stance, angling her toward the curb. Emily tilted her head slightly, listening, not to them, to the building, to the timing. Inside the hospital, a phone rang on Linda's desk. A secure line, one that almost never rang. Linda glanced at it, irritation flickering across her face. "I'm busy," she muttered, letting it ring. It rang again, and again. She picked it up sharply. "This is Rodriguez." Her expression changed. Color drained from her face so fast it looked like a trick of the light. "Yes," she said suddenly, very still. A pause. "Yes, she's here." Another pause, longer this time. Linda's free hand tightened around the edge of the desk. "Understood," she said. The line went dead. Linda stared at the phone for half a second, then looked up, her voice barely steady. "Stop them," she said. "What?" Karen asked. "Stop. Them." The security guards heard her shout through the glass. "Wait!" Linda yelled, rushing toward the doors. But outside, Emily was already being turned away from the building just as the PA system inside clicked softly, preparing to speak. The night air hit Emily harder than she expected, not because it was cold, but because it carried the smell of rain and gasoline and distance. The kind of air that reminded you how easy it was to be removed from places that pretended to be permanent. The guards adjusted their grips as they guided her along the sidewalk toward the edge of the parking lot, their boots scuffing against concrete still damp from the evening rinse. "Ma'am," Haskins said again more firmly, "now you need to keep moving." Emily complied. She let her steps shorten, her shoulders round slightly, her weight settle into the posture of someone being handled. It wasn't defeat. It was strategy. She measured each footfall in feet and inches without thinking. 8 feet from the doors, 12 from the curb, 27 from the corner camera's blind spot. Behind the glass, the emergency department buzzed with renewed urgency. Red lights pulsed in the trauma bay corridor, reflected in the windows like distant flares. A gurney burst through the inner doors, wheels screaming. Someone shouted for blood. Someone else called for a crash cart. Emily felt it in her bones before she heard it, the cadence of a situation spiraling toward the edge. "Incoming now," a voice echoed faintly through the glass. The second guard, older and quieter, tightened his hold. Almost there. Emily's phone vibrated again. This time it was 3 short pulses, spaced evenly. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. She knew what it meant. Escalation approved. Inside, Linda Rodriguez barreled toward the doors, her badge swinging wildly against her chest. She slammed her palm against the glass. "Stop," she shouted, her voice distorted by the barrier. "Stop right now." The guards glanced back, startled. "What?" Haskins said. "You told us to remove her." Linda jabbed a finger at Emily, then at the building. "Bring her back inside. Now." Confusion rippled through the vestibule. The doors slid open again with a mechanical sigh, as if the building itself were reconsidering a choice it had already made. Karen Willis appeared behind Linda, her face flushed. "What is going on?" Linda didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Emily. For the first time since this began, something like uncertainty flickered across the charge nurse's face. Not fear. Something worse. The dawning sense that she was no longer the highest authority in the room. "Ma'am," Haskins said, loosening his grip slightly. "Looks like there's been a change." Emily nodded once. "It happens." They turned her back toward the entrance. Phones rose higher now. Whispers sharpened into speculation. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else swore under their breath. As Emily crossed the threshold again, the sound inside hit her like a wall alarm's commands, the metallic clatter of instruments. A trauma team surged past, barely sparing her a glance. Blood streaked the side rail of the gurney as it vanished down the corridor. Reynolds stood near the desk, watching her re-entry with narrowed eyes. "What did you do?" he asked quietly as she passed. "Bought time," Emily replied. "Not much." Linda intercepted them halfway to the desk. "You," she said to Emily, her voice low and tight, "need to tell me exactly who you are. Right now." Emily met her gaze. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't square her shoulders. She simply stood there, hands relaxed at her sides, as if the chaos around her were a weather pattern she had already studied. "I can't," she said. "Not out here." Linda's jaw clenched. "Then I can't help you." "You already are," Emily replied. The PA system chimed softly overhead, the prelude to an announcement. Linda flinched, as if the sound had teeth. A young administrator in a pressed blazer hurried over, eyes darting between faces. "What's happening?" he demanded. "Why is security reversing course?" Linda turned on him. "Because we received a call." "From who?" Linda hesitated. "Just a fraction of a second. A federal office," she said. The administrator scoffed. "That's not specific enough to..." The PA system crackled. Static rolled through the lobby, flattening conversation mid-syllable. Heads lifted. Hands froze. The administrator's mouth hung open as the sound swallowed his objection. Emily closed her eyes. Not in relief. In preparation. "Attention all staff," came, the voice calm, precise, carrying the weight of rooms that did not allow mistakes. "This is a secure announcement. Please maintain your current positions." A murmur rippled outward like a shockwave. Karen's face went pale. "That's not our system voice," she whispered. "No," Linda said hoarsely. "It's not." The voice continued. "Do not remove the individual currently in the east lobby. Her presence is authorized." A beat. Emily opened her eyes. and for clarity the voice said that individual is Emily Carter. Her full name rang through the space with surgical precision. The effect was immediate and visceral. Haskins released her completely, stepping back as if burned. The older guard followed suit, eyes wide. The administrator staggered half a step, one hand bracing against the desk. Karen shook her head, lips moving silently. Reynolds exhaled slowly, a sound that carried both dread and awe. Linda felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The voice did not rise. It did not threaten. It did not explain. Ensure her immediate access to the trauma command team, it said. Further delay will result in consequences. The line went dead. Silence crashed down harder than any alarm. Emily didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't look around to gauge reactions. She waited because that was what she had always done after names were spoken in rooms like this. Finally, Linda found her voice. "Trauma conference room," she said, swallowing. "Clear it." People scattered. Reynolds gestured down the hall. "With me." As they walked, Reynolds leaned closer. "Pentagon?" he asked under his breath. Emily kept her eyes forward. Sometimes. They reached the doors just as a nurse burst out, breathless. "He's crashing," she said. "BP's dropping. Airways compromised." Emily's pace quickened, not hurried, not frantic. Focused. "Prep for a surgical airway," she said. "Now. And get ultrasound in the room before you cut." The nurse stared at her for half a second, then ran. Reynolds followed without argument. Behind them in the lobby, Linda stood frozen amid the wreckage of her certainty. Karen sank into a chair, hands trembling. The administrator's phone buzzed. He answered it with shaking fingers. "Yes," he croaked, his face drained of color. "Yes," he said again. "I understand." He looked up slowly, eyes tracking the hallway Emily had disappeared down. Outside, far above the hospital, a helicopter's distant thrum began to build, low and steady like a heartbeat returning. The trauma bay doors slammed open as the gurney burst inside, wheels screeching against the floor. The patient, a man in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, even now, even bleeding, lay motionless beneath a tangle of wires and oxygen tubing. His skin had taken on a grayish cast that told a story long before the monitors confirmed it. "BP 70/40, a nurse shouted. "Pulse thready," another voice answered. "Airways unstable." Emily stepped into the room like she had never left it. She didn't push. She didn't bark orders. She simply moved to the head of the bed and placed 2 fingers against the man's neck, eyes flicking between the monitor and the subtle rise and fall of his chest. "Don't intubate yet," she said calmly. The respiratory therapist froze mid-motion. "Dr. Reynolds." Reynolds looked at Emily, then at the monitor, then back at her again. His heart hammered in his chest. Every protocol drilled into him screamed to secure the airway immediately. "Why not?" he asked. Emily leaned closer, her voice dropping just enough that only those nearest could hear. Blunt trauma fractured his laryngeal structure. "You won't see it on the first scan. If you intubate, you'll collapse it completely." The therapist swallowed. "Then what do we do?" Emily met his eyes. "We do it the hard way." Reynolds exhaled through his teeth. "Surgical airway." Now, Emily confirmed. There was no hesitation this time. Scalpels were passed. Drapes snapped into place. Blood pooled and was suctioned away as hands moved with precision sharpened by adrenaline. In the control room above, unseen by the hospital staff below, a different kind of choreography unfolded. A wall of monitors glowed inside a secure operations center hundreds of miles away. Analysts tracked vitals, satellite feeds, and hospital telemetry in real time. A woman in a headset leaned toward her console. "She's inside the bay," she said. "Airway intervention underway." A man beside her, silver hair, no rank insignia, but authority radiating from posture alone, nodded once. "Good. Maintain open line." Back in the trauma bay, the procedure succeeded by inches and seconds. The airway stabilized. Oxygen saturation climbed from the brink and held. A collective breath was released. Emily stepped back, already shifting her focus. "Ultrasound," she said. "Now." The tech rolled the machine closer, hands shaking slightly. As the probe touched the patient's abdomen, Emily's eyes narrowed. "There," she said, pointing. "Retroperitoneal bleed. You won't control it here." Reynolds stared at the screen. "Oar's not ready." "It will be," Emily said. "It has to be." As if summoned by her certainty, a voice crackled through the intercom. Or, 3 cleared and standing by. Reynolds didn't ask who made that call. They moved the patient with practiced urgency, the gurney rolling down the corridor towards surgery. Staff lined the walls, watching the procession with a mixture of awe and confusion. Behind them, Linda Rodriguez stood near the nurse's station, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She watched Emily disappear down the hall, her mind replaying every word, every decision from the last 20 minutes. Karen Willis approached hesitantly. "Linda, who is she?" Linda didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she said finally. "But she's not supposed to exist." Karen frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Linda replied quietly, "that people like her only show up when something has already gone very wrong." In the administrator's office, the young man in the blazer sat rigidly at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, sir," he said for the 3rd time. "We're cooperating fully." A pause. "No, sir. I wasn't aware of her status." Another pause long enough for sweat to bead at his temples. "Yes, I understand the implications." He hung up slowly and stared at the blank wall ahead of him. The call had been brief, precise, devastating. "You interfered with a federally authorized operator during an active contingency." There had been no shouting, no threats, just facts. Down the hall, the ore doors swung closed as Emily scrubbed in beside Reynolds. Their movements were efficient, silent, except for the rhythmic splash of water and the rustle of sterile gowns. "You've done this before," Reynolds said, not looking at her. Emily nodded. "More times than I'd like." "In combat zones?" he asked. "In places without names," she replied. The surgery pushed forward minute after minute, balanced on a knife's edge. Blood loss was controlled. The bleed was clamped. Vitals steadied. When it was over, Reynolds sagged slightly against the counter-exhaustion, crashing in all at once. "He'll live," he said softly. Emily removed her gloves, hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Yes," she said. "He will." Reynolds studied her profile, the calm aftermath, the absence of triumph. "Who was he asked. Emily hesitated. "Someone who knows too much," she said, "and carries it quietly." As if on cue, the distant thrum of rotors grew louder, vibrating faintly through the walls. Heads turned. A nurse glanced toward the ceiling. "Helicopter?" she asked. Emily checked her watch. "On schedule." Outside, floodlights snapped on as a military helicopter descended toward the helipad, its presence impossible to ignore. Staff gathered at windows, whispers turning into stunned silence. Linda watched from the lobby, her reflection pale in the glass. Karen leaned closer. "Linda, are we in trouble?" Linda didn't answer immediately. "Yes," she said at last, "but not the way you think." The helicopter touched down with controlled force rotors whipping the air into a frenzy. Figures disembarked, measured, purposeful, unmistakably military. Inside, Emily walked out of the OR just as a man in a dark suit approached, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. "Miss Carter," he said, nodding respectfully. Emily returned the nod. "Status stabilized," he said. "Thanks to you." Reynolds watched the exchange, heart pounding. "Who are they?" he whispered to a nurse. The nurse shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't think we're supposed to ask." Emily turned toward the helipad doors, already moving again. As she passed Linda, she paused just for a moment. "You did the right thing," Emily said quietly. "Eventually." Linda swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Emily met her eyes, something unreadable flickering there. "So am I," she said. And then she was gone, leaving behind a hospital forever altered by the knowledge that power didn't always wear a badge, and sometimes it walked in quietly, carrying its own name like a key. The helicopter's rotors slowed to a heavy, deliberate chop as floodlights washed the helipad in harsh white. Wind tore at lab coats and scrubs as hospital staff gathered behind the glass doors, a silent audience to something none of them had trained for. The aircraft's side door slid open, and 2 uniformed figures stepped down with practiced ease, no rush, no spectacle, just certainty. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere shifted from chaos to containment. Phones buzzed along the corridors, secure lines lighting up with unfamiliar prefixes. A supervisor hurried past Linda Rodriguez without meeting her eyes. Karen Willis stood rooted near the nurse's station, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. "What's happening?" she whispered to no one in particular. No one answered. Emily walked down the corridor toward the helipad, access her steps, even her breathing controlled. The adrenaline that had driven her through the trauma bay had receded, leaving behind the familiar hollow calm that always followed a crisis. She checked her watch again. Seconds mattered less now. Consequences mattered more. The man in the dark suit fell into step beside her. His badge was turned inward, his expression neutral. "They're asking questions upstairs," he said quietly. "They should," Emily replied. "They're not happy." Emily allowed herself a thin, humorless smile. "They never are." Behind them, Dr. Reynolds stood just outside the OR, watching her go. He felt a pull, curiosity, respect, something like disbelief. He'd spent his life believing medicine was the highest calling he could answer. Tonight he'd glimpsed another layer beneath it, one that operated in silence and shadows. "Doctor," a nurse called softly, snapping him back. "Admin wants to see you." Reynolds nodded absently, eyes still on the corridor where Emily had disappeared. In the administrative wing, the hospital director, Thomas Avery, sat rigidly at the conference table. His suit jacket lay folded beside him, his tie loosened but not removed, as if he feared that doing so would strip away the last symbol of authority he possessed. A secure phone sat in the center of the table. It rang once. Avery swallowed and picked it up. "This is Avery." The voice on the other end was calm, measured, unmistakably federal. "Mr. Avery," it said. "Your facility interfered with an active Department of Defense medical contingency." Avery's mouth went dry. "There was a misunderstanding. There was a removal attempt," the voice corrected. "On a cleared operator." Silence stretched. "Yes," Avery said finally. "I've been briefed." "Good," the voice replied. "Then you understand why this will not be handled internally." Avery closed his eyes. "What are you asking of us?" "For now," the voice said. "Cooperation. Full access to security footage. Written statements from involved personnel. And no further interference." A pause. And later Avery asked quietly. "That depends," the voice replied, "on whether this was ignorance or negligence." The line went dead. Avery stared at the phone for a long moment before lowering it slowly back onto the table. His reflection in the polished surface looked older than it had an hour ago. Down by the helipad doors, Emily paused as the two uniformed figures approached. One of them, a woman with cropped hair and the posture of someone who had never learned to slouch, offered a brief nod. "Carter," she said. "Mitchell," Emily replied. They didn't shake hands. "Status?" Mitchell asked. "Patient stabilized." "Or intervention successful," Emily said. But the window was tight. Another 5 minutes, and we'd be having a different conversation. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "We know." The man in the dark suit stepped forward. "There's concern about exposure," he said. "Too many witnesses." "Too many witnesses." Emily glanced back through the glass at the staff clustered inside, the nurses, the guards, the doctors who had watched authority reverse itself in real time. "They saw a name," Emily said, "not the work. That may be enough. Or too much," Emily countered. Mitchell studied her. "You could have waited for clearance." Emily met her gaze steadily. Then he would be dead. A beat passed. Mitchell exhaled. "You're right." That admission carried weight. Inside, Linda Rodriguez sat alone in the break room, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving her with a dull ache behind her eyes and a growing knot in her chest. She replayed the moment over and over, the way Emily had stood there, calm and certain, while Linda had clung to protocol like a shield. "You don't get to walk in off the street and give orders." The words tasted bitter now. Karen slipped in quietly and took a seat across from her. "They're pulling footage," she said. "All of it." Linda nodded. "They should." Karen hesitated. "Linda, are we going to lose our jobs?" Linda considered the question carefully. "I don't know," she said. "But if we do, it won't be because we tried to do our jobs." Karen frowned. "Then why does it feel like we failed?" Linda looked up at her eyes, tired but clear. "Because sometimes doing your job isn't enough," she said. "Sometimes you have to recognize when the rules don't apply to the situation in front of you." Karen absorbed that in silence. Back near the helipad, the helicopter door closed with a solid thud. The rotors began to spin faster, lifting dust and debris into a swirling halo. Emily stood a few feet back, watching. "You're coming with us," the man in the suit said. Emily shook her head. "Not yet." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "You're declining transport. There's still fallout here," Emily said. "And people who need to hear things from me, not from a report." Mitchell studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You have 1 hour." The helicopter lifted off its roar, fading into the night as quickly as it had arrived. Inside the hospital, Avery stepped out of the administrative wing just as Emily re-entered the lobby. Their eyes met across the open space. He straightened instinctively. "Miss Carter." Emily stopped a few feet away. "Mr. Avery, I want to apologize," he began, "for how you were treated." Emily tilted her head slightly. "Apologies don't undo damage," she said calmly, "but they can prevent repeats." Avery nodded. "What can we do?" Emily glanced around at the staff, watching from a distance the guards who had dragged her, the nurses who had doubted her, the doctors who had followed her anyway. "Remember this," she said. "The next time someone asks for help quietly." Avery swallowed. "We will." Emily turned to leave but paused. "And Mr. Avery," she added. "Yes, next time the phone rings like that," she said, "answer it sooner." She walked away before he could respond. As she headed toward the exit this time, unimpeded, Emily felt the weight of the night settle onto her shoulders. The mission was technically complete. The patient would live. The immediate crisis had passed. But she knew better than anyone that this was only the midpoint. Somewhere, files were being opened, statements compared, decisions weighed, and not everyone involved would walk away untouched. As Emily pushed open the doors and stepped into the cooling night, a quiet certainty followed her like a shadow. The reckoning had only just begun. By the time dawn began to thin the darkness over the city, the hospital no longer felt like the same building. The fluorescent lights still buzzed, monitors still beeped, gurneys still rattled down polished corridors. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted, an invisible line crossed, an unspoken truth revealed. Emily Carter sat alone in a small consultation room near the administrative wing. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee, the kind of neutral space designed for difficult conversations. She hadn't been asked to wait there. She had chosen it. Across the table lay a manila folder. No labels, no hospital logo, just paper thick with consequence. She didn't open it. Instead, she watched the second hand of the wall clock sweep forward, counting off seconds she had learned long ago never to waste. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. Thomas Avery entered without knocking. He looked different in the early light, smaller, somehow the authority he wore like a tailored jacket now hanging looser on his frame. He closed the door gently behind him. "Miss Carter," he said. Emily inclined her head. "Mr. Avery." Avery gestured toward the folder. "That's the preliminary report. Federal liaison requested you review it." "I don't need to," Emily replied. "I was there." Avery took a seat anyway, fingers lacing together. "They're calling it a procedural failure." Emily's mouth twitched just slightly. "They always do at first. They're interviewing everyone," Avery continued. "Security, nursing staff, administration, doctors." "Good." Avery hesitated. "They asked specifically about the moment you were escorted out." Emily finally looked at him. "And what did you say?" Avery held her gaze. "That we followed protocol, and that protocol was insufficient." Emily studied him for a long beat, assessing sincerity the way she once assessed threats. "That was the right answer," she said. Avery exhaled slowly. "It doesn't feel like it." "No," Emily agreed. "It rarely does." Outside the room, the hospital hummed with restrained tension. Conversations dropped to whispers when unfamiliar suits passed through the halls. Staff avoided eye contact with the security desk. Phones were answered on the first ring now every time. Karen Willis stood at the nurse's station, hands shaking slightly as she sorted charts she had already organized twice. Her mind replayed the scene in the lobby over and over, Emily's calm, her certainty, the way the PA system had spoken her name like a verdict. Linda Rodriguez approached quietly. "You okay?" Linda asked. Karen nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired." Linda didn't press. She leaned against the counter, lowering her voice. "They asked for your statement yet?" Karen swallowed. "Not yet. They will," Linda said gently. "Just tell the truth." Karen laughed softly, the sound brittle. What if the truth makes me look stupid? Linda met her eyes. Then you'll look human. Karen absorbed that, nodding slowly. In the trauma ICU, Doctor, Reynolds stood beside the patient's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The man lay sedated now, lines and tubes mapping a battle his body had narrowly survived. Reynolds had read the file twice already. The name meant nothing to him. The annotations meant everything. Classified clearance required. Restricted access protocol. Pentagon oversight. Reynolds ran a hand through his hair. He'd built his career on competence, on mastering what could be learned. Tonight had taught him something else entirely. There were worlds intersecting with his own that he would never fully see. A knock sounded at the ICU door. Reynolds turned as a man in a dark suit stepped inside, badge flashing briefly before disappearing again. "Dr. Reynolds," the man said. "I'm with Federal Review." Reynolds nodded. "How's the patient alive?" the man replied. "Because of you. And her." Reynolds hesitated. "Who was he?" The man studied him carefully. Someone who protects a lot of people without ever being known for it. Reynolds considered that. Like her. The man allowed himself a thin smile. Exactly like her. Back in the consultation room, Emily finally opened the folder. She skimmed the pages quickly, timelines, transcripts, names. She paused at one line in particular. Security personnel applied physical escort without escalation review. Her jaw tightened. Avery watched her closely. "Is something wrong?" Emily tapped the line once. "This." Avery frowned. "They followed procedure." "Yes," Emily said. "And that's the problem." She closed the folder. "Those guards did what they were trained to do. They're not the issue." Avery leaned forward. "Then who is Emily?" Met his gaze unblinking. The system that taught them compliance mattered more than judgment. Avery fell silent. "There will be consequences," Emily continued. "For some, maybe not for all. But this won't disappear." Avery nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" Emily asked. He held her gaze. "I think I'm starting to." A knock interrupted them. Avery opened the door to reveal a woman in a tailored uniform, her posture immaculate. She nodded once to Emily. "Miss Carter," she said. "They're ready." Emily stood. Avery rose as well. "Is there anything else you need from us?" Emily considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said. "Learn from this." Avery nodded. "We will." Emily followed the uniformed woman down the hall past staff who pretended not to stare. Her presence still pulled the air tight around her, even now. They stopped outside a secure conference room. Voices murmured inside, measured, controlled, powerful. The woman turned to her. "They'll want a full account." Emily nodded. "They'll get it." The door opened. Inside a long table stretched beneath dim lighting, several figures looked up as she entered, some in uniform, some in suits, all carrying the quiet weight of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Emily took her seat without invitation. One of them leaned forward. "Miss Carter," he said, "let's talk about what went wrong." Emily folded her hands on the table. "Let's talk about what almost did," she replied. Outside the conference room, the hospital carried on, unaware that decisions being made behind that closed door would ripple outward, touching careers, policies, and lives far beyond its walls. And as Emily began to speak, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer just about a mistake. It was about accountability. And not everyone would be ready for what that truly meant. The conference room felt smaller once the door closed. Not because of its size, but because of what occupied it. Emily Carter sat at the far end of the table, posture straight, hands folded, eyes steady. Around her were men and women who rarely shared the same physical space, unless something had already gone catastrophically wrong. Their clothes varied, dark suits, tailored uniforms, but the energy was uniform-controlled, precise, heavy with consequence. A digital recorder clicked on. "State your name for the record," a man at the head of the table said. "Emily Carter," she replied. He nodded. "Affiliation," Emily didn't hesitate. "Pentagon Medical Operations. Special Access Program." A subtle shift rippled around the table. Chairs adjusted. Pens paused mid-note. The man leaned back slightly. "You were not scheduled to be at that facility." "No," Emily said. "I wasn't." "Then explain why you were." Emily drew a slow breath, not to steady herself, but to pace the room. There was a classified transfer in progress, she said. The patient you stabilized tonight was part of that transfer. His survival window was narrower than projections indicated. A woman across the table frowned. That deviation wasn't flagged. It was, Emily replied, but it was buried under 3 layers of outdated assumptions. Silence followed. You bypassed clearance, the man said carefully. I bypassed delay, Emily corrected. There's a difference. Another figure leaned forward, fingers steepled. You allowed yourself to be physically removed from the facility. Yes. Why? Emily met his eyes. Because escalation only works if it's earned. A pause. You could have identified yourself immediately, the man said. Yes. Why didn't you? Emily's gaze flicked briefly to the recorder. Because the moment I say my name in public, it stops being mine. That landed harder than any raised voice. The woman who had spoken earlier glanced down at her notes. 2 security guards applied physical escort. 1 administrator authorized removal. Multiple staff questioned your credibility. Emily nodded. Correct. And you're saying that wasn't misconduct. I'm saying it was predictable, Emily replied. Which makes it dangerous. The man at the head of the table tapped his pen once. Explain. Emily leaned forward now, just slightly. Hospitals run on hierarchy. So does the military. Both are necessary. But when hierarchy replaces judgment, people die. She let the words sit. They didn't know who I was, she continued. That's not the failure. The failure was that they stopped listening once they decided I didn't matter. Another silence, thicker this time. Across the city inside the hospital, the ripple effects were already spreading. Security supervisor Daniel Haskins sat in a small office with a federal investigator across from him. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white. Did Miss Carter resist? The investigator asked. No, sir, Haskins said. She complied. Did she threaten anyone? No, sir. Did she attempt to bypass security through force? No. The investigator looked up. Then why was physical escort applied? Haskins swallowed. Because we were told she was interfering. By whom? The charge nurse. Then administration. The investigator nodded slowly, making a note. Did she identify herself? No, sir. Did you ask? Haskins hesitated. No, sir. The investigator met his eyes. Why not? Haskins opened his mouth. Closed it. Because he said finally we didn't think we needed to. In the nurse's station, Karen Willis sat across from another interviewer, eyes red-rimmed but steady. You dismissed her concerns, the interviewer said. Karen nodded. Yes. Why? Karen took a breath. Because I've been lied to before. Because people fake urgency to get access. Because I was tired. The interviewer watched her closely. Do you think you were wrong? Karen didn't hesitate. Yes. That answer was written down carefully. Back in the conference room, Emily's debrief continued. You triggered a Pentagon PA override inside a civilian hospital, one official said. That's not insignificant. No, Emily agreed. It's not. Was it necessary? Emily didn't answer immediately. She pictured the lobby again, the scraping shoes, the hands on her arms the moment before the doors closed. She pictured the trauma bay lights flaring red, the patient's collapsing airway. Yes, she said. It was. The man at the head of the table nodded once. Then let's talk consequences. Emily's expression didn't change. Hospital administration will face review, he continued. Security procedures will be evaluated. Staff retraining will be mandated. Good, Emily said. And you, he added. Emily lifted her chin slightly. Yes, you violated location protocol. I did. There will be a formal reprimand. Emily nodded. Understood. But he continued, you saved a life that our projections had already written off. Another pause. That carries weight. Emily said nothing. The woman across the table closed her folder. You could have escalated sooner. Yes, Emily replied. You chose not to. Yes. Why? Emily met her gaze. Because the moment power announces itself, it stops teaching. Silence fell again, this time thoughtful. Outside the conference room, Dr. Reynolds stood near a window overlooking the city. The sun had fully risen now, painting the skyline in pale gold. He watched staff move below ordinary routines, resuming over extraordinary consequences. Linda Rodriguez approached quietly. They're saying admin review is going to be serious, Linda said. Reynolds nodded. Good. Linda hesitated. Do you think she hates us? Reynolds thought of Emily's calm voice, her steady hands, the absence of anger. "No," he said. "I think she expected us." Back inside, the man at the head of the table shut off the recorder. "Miss Carter," he said, "you're cleared to stand down." Emily rose. "You'll be reassigned temporarily," he added. "Mandatory review period." Emily nodded. "Understood." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were right." Emily paused at the door. "Just for a moment." "Being right," she said quietly, "isn't the goal." She left without another word. Back at the hospital, a notice quietly circulated. Administrative access suspended pending investigation. Security protocols under federal review. Mandatory judgment-based response training scheduled. No headlines. No press conference. Just changes. As Emily stepped out into the morning air, the city waking around her, she felt the familiar weight settle again, the cost of being unseen, of doing work that could never be claimed. Behind her, the hospital stood unchanged in brick and glass, but inside it something fundamental had cracked. And through that crack, accountability was finally beginning to show. By mid-morning, the hospital had learned how to breathe again, but it did so carefully, like a patient recovering from a near-fatal shock. Administrative emails moved quietly through inboxes. Meetings were rescheduled without explanation. Offices that usually buzzed with authority stayed closed, lights dimmed behind frosted glass. The building functioned, but it did so with an awareness it had not possessed before someone had looked straight through its walls. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the helipad, watching the city unfold beneath a pale blue sky. The air smelled cleaner now, washed clear by the night's rain. The helicopter that had brought oversight and consequence sat idle behind her rotors, stilled, its presence no longer required but not forgotten. Mitchell joined her hands, resting loosely at her sides. "You made waves," she said. Emily's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. That wasn't the goal. Still happened. Yes. Mitchell studied her profile. "You know admin is scrambling. Careers will change. Policies will change." "They should," Emily replied. "They're calling it a systemic failure," Mitchell added. Emily's mouth curved faintly. "That's progress." Below them, an ambulance pulled into the ER bay. The doors opened. Life continued. Mitchell shifted her weight. "You ever wonder what happens if people start recognizing you?" Emily finally looked at her. "That's why I don't stay long." Inside the hospital, Thomas Avery sat alone in his office, the blinds partially open now for the first time since dawn. A single document lay on his desk, an interim suspension notice stamped and dated, effective immediately. Not termination. Not yet. But unmistakably a line drawn in ink he hadn't controlled. He read it twice. Then he picked up his phone and dialed. "Linda," he said when she answered. "Can you come up?" Linda Rodriguez entered 10 minutes later. She didn't bother sitting. "I'm being suspended pending review," Avery said plainly. Linda nodded. "I know." Avery looked at her, searching for something, sympathy perhaps. "Do you think this is fair?" Linda considered the question carefully. "I think it's necessary," Avery exhaled. "I followed protocol." "Yes," Linda said. "But you didn't follow the moment." Avery stared at the wall. "I built my career on rules." "So did I," Linda replied. "Last night taught me the difference between rules and responsibility." Avery looked at her again. This time he nodded. "Take care of the staff," he said quietly. "I will," Linda replied. As she turned to leave, Avery spoke once more. "She saved a life, didn't she?" "Yes," Linda said. "More than one." In the ICU, Dr. Reynolds stood with his arms folded, watching the patient's vitals hold steady. The man would be transferred later that day, quietly, securely, with no announcement and no ceremony. Reynolds felt an unexpected heaviness settle in his chest. He had always believed he understood what pressure felt like. Last night had redefined it. A nurse approached. "Doctor, they're asking for you downstairs." Reynolds nodded. "I'll be there." As he turned, he paused beside the patient's bed. "You don't know it," he murmured, "but someone fought very hard for you." The patient didn't stir. Downstairs, Karen Willis stood near the same triage desk where it had all begun. The space looked identical. The monitors hummed. The keyboard clicked. But Karen's hands moved differently now, slower, more deliberate. A federal interviewer approached. Miss Willis. Karen straightened. Yes. Your statement was noted, the interviewer said. Your acknowledgement of error matters. Karen swallowed. Will I be disciplined? Possibly, the interviewer replied. But accountability isn't always punishment. Karen nodded. I understand. The interviewer hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, you helped save the patient. You just didn't know it yet. Karen's eyes filled just slightly. Outside, Emily received a final call. Yes, she said quietly. A pause. Yes, I'm clear. Another pause. I understand the reassignment. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Mitchell watched her. Where to next? Emily looked once more at the hospital. At the glass doors. The place where she had almost been erased by assumption. Somewhere, they don't know my name, she said. Mitchell nodded. They never do. Emily walked toward the waiting vehicle parked at the edge of the helipad. Before she reached it, footsteps approached behind her. Miss Carter. Emily turned. Dr. Reynolds stood there, hands at his sides, expression earnest. I just wanted to say thank you, he said. Not as an administrator. Not as part of whatever this is. Just as a doctor, Emily finished. Yes. Emily studied him. You listened, she said. That mattered. Reynolds nodded. I won't forget it. Good, Emily replied. Neither will the next patient. They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Emily turned and left. As the vehicle pulled away, the hospital shrank in the distance, brick and glass returning to its ordinary proportions. But inside it, something had been permanently recalibrated. Later that afternoon, a quiet memo circulated through staff inboxes. Effective immediately, all escalation decisions required judgment review, in addition to protocol adherence. No names were mentioned. No blame assigned, but everyone knew why it existed. In the ICU, the patient was transferred under heavy security, his identity never spoken aloud. He survived. He would continue to do work no one would ever thank him for. And somewhere on a highway stretching miles beyond the city, Emily Carter stared out the window, the hum of tires beneath her like a steady pulse. She did not feel victorious. She felt resolved. The world had not changed. But for one night and one hospital it had been forced to pause, and sometimes that was enough. The transfer happened without spectacle. No sirens, no media, no announcement over the PA. Just a quiet procession through a back corridor as two unmarked vehicles waited beyond the service exit engines idling. The patient, now stable, still sedated, was moved with a level of care that bordered on reverence. The hospital staff who assisted spoke little, their movements precise, almost ritualistic. Emily watched from a distance, hands in the pockets of her jacket, her presence deliberately understated. This part was always the same. The work ended, the noise faded, and the truth slipped back into the shadows where it belonged. Mitchell stood beside her eyes, tracking the final gurney as it disappeared through the doors. Once he's gone, she said, this place will go back to pretending last night was an anomaly. Emily nodded. Most places do. You think that's enough? Mitchell asked. A memo, a suspension, some retraining. Emily considered the question. It's not about enough, she said. It's about direction. Mitchell glanced at her. Meaning next time. Emily replied, someone like me won't have to be dragged halfway out the door before they're heard. Mitchell exhaled. You're an optimist. Emily's mouth curved slightly. I'm a realist who's seen worse. Inside the hospital, the fallout continued to unfold quietly, deliberately. Linda Rodriguez stood in front of a small group of nurses in a closed briefing room. No cameras, no recorders, just faces she knew well. We made mistakes, Linda said plainly. I made mistakes. The room was silent. We trusted process more than people, she continued, and that almost cost a life. Karen Willis sat near the back, hands folded, listening intently. I'm not here to assign blame, Linda said. That's being handled elsewhere. I'm here to say this authority doesn't make you right. Listening does. She met Karen's eyes. And when someone speaks with certainty, don't just ask who they are. Ask why. Karen nodded slowly, the lesson landing deep. In the administrative wing, Thomas Avery packed the last of his personal items into a box. He moved carefully, methodically, as if sudden motions might shatter what little composure he had left. A junior administrator hovered near the door. Sir, they've scheduled your review hearing. Avery nodded. I expected that. Do you want legal counsel present? Avery paused, then shook his head. No. The junior administrator blinked. Are you sure? Avery looked around the office one last time. If I can't face what happened honestly, he said, then I deserve whatever comes next. The administrator nodded and left. Avery closed the box and carried it toward the door, shoulders heavy but posture upright. Back near the helipad, Emily received one final message. Transport complete. Patient secure. She exhaled, tension she hadn't realized she was holding finally loosening. Mitchell checked her watch. Your hour's up. Emily nodded. I know. As Emily turned toward the exit, a voice called out behind her. Miss Carter. She stopped. Linda Rodriguez approached, no uniform jacket now, just scrubs and tired eyes. I wanted to thank you, Linda said. Not for the outcome. For the lesson. Emily studied her carefully. What lesson? Linda didn't answer immediately. That silence doesn't mean absence, she said finally. And calm doesn't mean harmless. Emily considered that. And authority doesn't mean correct. Linda managed a small smile. I won't forget. Good, Emily said. Neither will I. They stood there for a moment, two women from very different worlds, briefly aligned by consequence. Then Emily turned and walked away. As she exited the hospital grounds, the city stretched out before her, miles of roads, millions of people, countless quiet emergencies unfolding beyond the reach of headlines. Her phone vibrated. A new assignment, new coordinates, new silence. She didn't open it yet. Behind her, inside the hospital, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Patients arrived, doctors treated, nurses triaged. But beneath the routine, a subtle tension remained, a collective awareness that something unseen might walk through those doors again. And next time, the doors would open. As Emily reached the waiting vehicle, she paused once more, glancing back at the building that had nearly failed and then learned. Justice hadn't arrived with sirens or shouting. It had arrived with a name spoken calmly over a PA system. And the echo of that moment would linger far longer than anyone realized. The hospital looked ordinary again by late afternoon. Sunlight slanted through the lobby windows, catching dust motes in the air. Families sat with coffee cups and tired eyes. A child laughed somewhere near the vending machines. The security desk had returned to its quiet rhythm. Badge checks, polite nods, the illusion of control restored. But beneath the surface, the building remembered. Linda Rodriguez walked the corridors slowly, deliberately, as if seeing them for the first time. She stopped at the triage desk and watched Karen Willis work, watched how Karen listened now, how she leaned in slightly when people spoke, how she asked one more question before moving on. Linda felt something loosen in her chest. That, she thought, was at least one thing done right. In a small conference room on the second floor, federal reviewers concluded their final on-site session. Laptops closed, folders stacked. Words chosen carefully. One of them spoke to Linda directly. There will be mandatory retraining, judgment-based escalation, scenario review. Linda nodded. We'll implement it. And administration, the reviewer asked. Linda didn't flinch. We'll cooperate fully. The reviewer studied her for a long moment. You were honest, he said. That matters. Linda exhaled. It should. Down the hall, Thomas Avery stood outside the same conference room box at his feet. He hadn't been asked to wait there, but he felt it was appropriate. When the door opened, the reviewers passed him without comment. Linda stopped. You don't have to leave today, she said quietly. Avery shook his head. Yes, I do. Linda searched his face. Do you regret it? Avery considered the question. I regret not listening sooner, he said. Not the consequences. Linda nodded. That may be what saves your career. Avery offered a faint smile. Or ends it. Either way, Linda said, it'll be honest. Avery picked up the box and walked away without looking back. In the ICU, Dr. Reynolds completed his final notes on the patient's chart before it was locked behind layers of classification. The bed stood empty now, sheets freshly changed as if nothing extraordinary had happened there. Reynolds sat for a moment, longer hands resting on the rail. He thought of the way Emily Carter had stood in the trauma bay, how she hadn't needed to announce herself, how competence had spoken louder than authority. He knew one thing for certain: the next time someone like her walked into his hospital, he would listen first. That knowledge settled like a vow. Outside, the city hummed. Traffic rolled. Sirens wailed in the distance. Somewhere across town, another emergency was unfolding, another quiet countdown. Emily Carter was already miles away. The vehicle moved steadily along the highway, tires whispering against asphalt. Buildings gave way to open stretches of road, then to low industrial zones, then back to city again. Emily stared out the window, watching reflections slide across the glass. Her phone buzzed once. She answered without looking. "Carter." A familiar voice responded. "You clear? Yes. Good. Review board finalized. Minimal blowback." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "And the hospital changes implemented. Admin suspension upheld. No public record." Emily nodded, though the caller couldn't see it. "Good." A pause. "They asked about you," the voice added. Emily's eyes opened. "They always do." "You're being reassigned," the voice said. "Different region. Similar work." Emily didn't ask where. She never did. "Understood," she replied. Another pause, this one longer. "For what it's worth," the voice said quietly, "you did the right thing." Emily looked out at the road stretching endlessly ahead. "That's not a currency I can spend." The call ended. Emily slipped the phone back into her pocket and let her head rest against the seat. Fatigue settled in now, not physical but something deeper. The kind that came from standing between systems and consequences, from being the unseen hinge on which lives sometimes turned. She thought of the lobby again. The scraping shoes, the hands on her arms, the moment before the doors closed. She didn't feel anger. She felt understanding. Most people weren't cruel. They were tired, overworked, conditioned to trust process because process felt safer than judgment. Sometimes she thought justice wasn't about punishment at all. It was about interruption. Back at the hospital, a new shift arrived. Fresh faces, fresh coffee. The story of the night before was already being softened into something easier to carry: an unusual incident, a federal involvement, a lesson learned. But in the nurse's station, Karen Willis taped a small handwritten note to the inside of her locker door. "Listen first." She didn't explain it to anyone. Linda Rodriguez stood at the security desk for a moment before heading out, watching the guards interact with visitors. She noticed how questions were asked now, how assumptions were paused instead of acted on. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. As dusk settled over the city, the hospital lights glowed against the darkening sky, still a place of healing, still a place of mistakes, but now carrying the faint imprint of a moment when power had been challenged and recalibrated. Miles away, Emily Carter watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the road ahead in gold and shadow. She didn't know the names of the people she would help next. They wouldn't know hers, and that was how it had to be. Because justice, she had learned long ago, was rarely loud. Sometimes it arrived quietly with a pause, a name, and the courage to listen. Night returned to the city the way it always did, slowly, inevitably erasing the sharp edges of the day. At the hospital, the evening shift settled in. The lobby lights dimmed to their nighttime setting, softer now, less interrogating. The same sliding doors opened and closed for strangers, families, and the quietly desperate. To an untrained eye, nothing had changed. But places remembered. Linda Rodriguez paused at the entrance before leaving for the night. She stood there longer than necessary, watching the flow of people pass through the doors. A man arguing with insurance. A woman clutching her purse too tightly. A teenager pacing, fear barely contained. Linda noticed something she hadn't before, not what they were demanding, but what they were carrying. She exhaled and stepped outside. Across town, Thomas Avery sat alone at his kitchen table, the cardboard box from his office now unpacked in uneven piles. Awards leaned against the wall. Framed certificates rested face down. His phone buzzed with messages he hadn't answered, some supportive, some cautious, some already distancing themselves. He poured a glass of water and stared at it for a long time. For the first time in years, there was no meeting to prepare for, no authority to exercise, just the raw shape of consequence. He thought of the woman in the lobby, the calm in her eyes, the certainty he had dismissed. If I had listened, he thought. The realization settled heavily but not bitterly. Across the city, Karen Willis locked her locker and slung her bag over her shoulder. She caught her reflection in the mirror, tired, older than she'd felt a week ago, but clearer somehow. She reached up and touched the note taped inside the door. Listen first." Karen smiled faintly and turned out the light. On a quiet highway miles away, Emily Carter sat in the back seat of a moving vehicle, the hum of tires, a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. City lights blurred into streaks of white and amber as the road carried her farther from the hospital, farther from the moment that had briefly pulled her into the open. She checked her phone once more. No new messages. That meant things were stable for now. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Long night," Emily nodded. "Longer than most." "You heading home?" he asked. Emily looked out the window. Not exactly. The vehicle merged onto another highway, miles unfolding beneath them. Somewhere ahead, another hospital glowed against the dark. Somewhere else, another countdown had already begun. Emily rested her head back against the seat. She thought of the patient, the way his vitals had steadied, the way his life had tilted back from the edge. He would wake up in a different place, surrounded by people who didn't know his name, protected by systems that had almost failed him. He would never know how close it had come. And that was fine. That was the point. At the hospital, she'd left behind a junior nurse, paused at the security desk, unsure whether to wave someone through. One of the guards hesitated too, then asked a question instead of issuing a command. A small thing, but small things accumulated. As midnight approached, the city settled into its familiar rhythm, sirens in the distance, lights flickering on and off, lives colliding and separating in quiet, unrecorded ways. Emily Carter closed her eyes. She did not replay the applause that never came. She did not dwell on the authority she'd briefly wielded. She thought instead of the moment before the PA system spoke the silence, the breath held the fragile space where a single choice could bend the outcome. That was where she lived. Not in recognition, not in rank, but in the narrow margin between failure and survival. As the vehicle disappeared into the night, the hospital stood behind her, unchanged in shape, altered in spirit. Security would remember the pause before force. Nurses would remember the weight of certainty. Administrators would remember that power when misused echoes. And somewhere in its walls, the echo of a name spoken calmly over a PA system would linger, not as a threat but as a reminder that justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, just in time. There's a moment in life that doesn't look important at first. It's quiet, uncomfortable, easy to ignore. It's the moment when someone speaks calmly, and we decide whether to listen. In the hospital that night, no one failed because they were evil. They failed because they were tired, because they trusted rules more than judgment, because it felt safer to follow procedure than to pause and truly hear the person in front of them. And that almost cost a life. The truth is, some of the most important people you'll ever meet won't announce themselves. They won't raise their voices. They won't demand respect. They'll stand quietly, carrying responsibility you can't see, hoping someone is wise enough to notice before it's too late. In the real world, power doesn't always wear a uniform. Wisdom doesn't always come with authority. And justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a single moment of restraint, a choice to ask one more question, to listen one more second, to treat someone with dignity before deciding who they are. If this story teaches us anything, it's this. How you treat people when you think they don't matter says everything about who you are. Before you scroll away, take a moment and tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated or realized too late that you underestimated someone else? And if stories like this move you, challenge you, and stay with you long after they end, make sure to subscribe. There are many more powerful moments ahead, and you won't want to miss them.